During World War I, the United States passed the Selective Service Act to increase its military strength. This act drafted approximately 3 million men into service. African Americans, Native Americans, Asian Americans, and Hispanic Americans all made important contributions during the war. However, African Americans were often placed in segregated units and given non-combat roles. Women did not have to join the military through the draft, but they were able to serve in the Navy in roles that did not involve direct combat. They were important as nurses, secretaries, and telephone operators. The Army didn't let them join, but the Navy did, and found them useful. Women's participation in the war effort challenged traditional gender roles and paved the way for future advancements in women's rights. Moreover, the U.S. had to transport soldiers, food, and gear across the ocean. To deal with this, the country started building new ships to improve its abilities at sea. Workers at the shipyard, who were not required to join the military, played an important part in this endeavor. Prefabrication was used to make ships faster and meet the need for transportation. These actions were taken to improve the country's military strength and help the Allies win the war. The United States aimed to help win the global conflict and support its allies by involving people from different backgrounds and improving infrastructure. When American troops and supplies came, it helped the tired Allied forces in World War I a lot. To protect against German submarine attacks, the United States started using the convoy system. This meant that groups of merchant ships were guarded by naval vessels. The U.S. helped create a barrier of mines in the North Sea to stop U-boats. Doughboys, the American soldiers, brought new energy and enthusiasm to the war effort. General John J. Pershing led the American Expeditionary Force, which played a vital role in changing the course of the war in Europe. New and powerful weapons emerged during the war. Tanks and airplanes were very important in changing the outcome of battles. Air warfare progressed quickly as pilots switched from using pistols to mounted machine guns. Eddie Rickenbacker was a famous American pilot who became an ace by engaging in 134 air battles and shooting down 26 enemy planes. But we cannot ignore the fact that the war caused a lot of destruction. World War I was an extremely devastating conflict where soldiers encountered serious dangers such as machine gun fire and poison gas. American soldiers arrived in Europe just in time to stop the German advance on French cities, including Paris. Alvin York was a brave soldier who became famous for his heroic actions during the war. Interestingly, he was initially a conscientious objector, but later decided to fight. When he came back to the United States, people saw him as a hero because of his brave actions during the battle. Germany agreed to an armistice on November 11, 1918, after being tired from the war. The war caused a lot of damage, resulting in the loss of over 22 million lives, with half of them being civilians. Moreover, about 20 million people got injured, and 10 million had to leave their homes as refugees. The war cost around $338 million. To win the war, American soldiers alone were not enough. The U.S. depended on its industries, which went through a big change. President Wilson took control of the economy and created the War Industries Board, which was headed by Bernard M. Baruch. The WIB helped increase industrial production by encouraging mass production methods and making products more standardized. It established production targets and distributed raw materials. These measures mainly impacted wholesale prices, causing an increase in retail prices and profits for companies. The government made different agencies to control different parts of the economy. The Railroad Administration managed railroads, and the Fuel Administration supervised the usage of coal, gasoline, and heating oil. Americans willingly saved fuel by implementing measures like gasless Sundays and lightless nights. They also introduced daylight saving time to make the most of daylight hours. Wages went up in some industries, but inflation made it harder for workers to buy things, so they lost purchasing power. The difference in wages between workers and managers helped labor unions to become more popular. The National War Labor Board was created to solve problems between workers and management and make working conditions better. A new agency called the Food Administration was created to assist in producing and saving food supplies. The agency asked Americans to eat less food. Herbert Hoover, who led the Food Administration, created programs such as meatless, sweetless, and wheatless days. The Food Administration encouraged people to grow their own food, which led to the popularity of victory gardens. The government set prices for important food items, which encouraged farmers to produce more. This led to a big increase in the amount of land used for farming. The United States was able to send 3 times more food to the Allies, which helped them in their war efforts. The government took different actions to fund the war. One way to address the issue was to raise and implement various types of taxes. These taxes were the progressive income tax and war profits tax. Another way to raise funds was through the sale of war bonds, which relied heavily on volunteers to promote and sell them. Famous people gave speeches and ads were shown in newspapers and on billboards to motivate people to join in. The government created the Committee on Public Information, CPI, to influence public opinion and gain support. George Creel, a former journalist, led the CPI, and they used artists and advertisers to make promotional materials such as posters, paintings, and cartoons. They gave out pamphlets in different languages and recruited around 75,000 4-minute men to give speeches about the war. The government used different methods to get the public to support the war. The war caused negative feelings towards immigrants, especially Germans. People of German descent or with German-sounding names were discriminated against, which led to them losing their jobs and being socially ostracized. Even German Americans were subjected to acts of violence. Congress passed the Espionage and Sedition Acts to punish those who obstructed the war effort, criticized the government, or interfered with the draft. This curtailed freedom of speech and was in response to dissent and opposition. Over 2,000 people were prosecuted and around 1,000 were convicted for anti-war activities because the laws they broke went against the First Amendment's principles. If someone wrote something against the war or the Allies, they could lose their ability to send mail. And if an individual spoke out against it, they could lose their job. The Espionage and Sedition Acts mainly targeted socialists and union leaders. Eugene Fay Debs, Emma Goldman, and Big Bill Haywood were punished for their opposition to the war through imprisonment, fines, or deportation. The war affected African Americans and women in important ways. African American leaders had different opinions about the war. Webb Du Bois thought that helping in the war would help the fight for equality, but some people disagreed because they didn't want to help a government that didn't care about equal rights for everyone. The Great Migration was sped up by the war. Many African Americans left the rural South to go to northern cities. They did this to get away from racial discrimination and find jobs in industries. African Americans who moved to new places had better job opportunities, especially during the war. But they still encountered difficulties in the North, such as discrimination and too many people living in one place. During the war, American women took on jobs that were typically done by men, like working on railroads, cooking, working at docks, and laying bricks. Women took part in volunteer organizations such as the Red Cross, and helped the war effort by selling war bonds. Women became more visible and influential during the war, but they were not paid the same as men.